Hello again everyone and welcome back to the Underground. This is the Intel update for January 18th, 2023. Happy New Year everyone. Looks like this new year is already getting pretty spicy, so let's go ahead and kick things off by talking about significant incidents and concerns in the Northeast region. One of the biggest incidents that got a lot of mainstream news media coverage was the polar vortex, or whatever kind of buzzword you want to call the winter weather storm that hit around the beginning of December last month. Particularly the actions that actually happened within the city of Buffalo, New York. Now, a lot of people got a lot of news coverage on this, so I'm not going to beat it to death, but the situation in Buffalo, New York, and how that whole winter kind of situation worked its way out was very indicative and a very good demonstration of a lot of the issues that we've been talking about previously. We had a lot of infrastructure problems. We had a lot of traffic incidents. We had a lot of, censored medical issues, I'll say it like that. And we had a lot of police state actions, right? So there were a lot of issues to kind of unpack with this incident, and though none of these are particularly surprising, it's very important that we all kind of keep these in the back of our mind here, right? For instance, one of the biggest elements of this whole incident that kind of caught my eye was the implementation of military police to serve in a domestic policing role in Buffalo, New York, to keep drivers off of the roads and, underneath the kind of quasi-curfew that was enforced. Really, it was just a ban on driving personal vehicles on the road during the snowstorm. Now, I know a lot of people, whenever I talk about curfews, people don't really like it because there are a lot of people out there that actually support curfews for whatever reason. But I'm just saying it's probably a good idea to kind of keep an eye on incidents like this, especially considering that now we have the word curfew as part of our daily vocabulary in a lot of cases around the country. There are a lot of persistent curfews that have been in place for years, and they just keep popping up in a lot of places around the country. And I, don't think that's a super great thing. So that's why I want to keep talking about these kinds of incidents, because I think we all kind of have a shared understanding of the seriousness of curfews and any time you're using the National Guard or any green suitor military force in the United States potentially against citizens. That's not a good thing. I don't care how friendly the relationship seems, it's not a super great thing. So the Buffalo incident was not great. Granted, it was a very serious issue and really highlights a lot of prepping concerns about how you really need to be prepared for extreme severe winter weather. I think way more severe than is kind of normal for the area. But at the same time, you also need to be concerned about the things that nobody likes to talk about, like domestic policing actions. That's kind of a hot topic that, again, really people don't want to think about, but you're not really going to see a whole lot of prepping, kind of culture publicly embracing the idea of, all right, well, now this is part of our daily life here, to talk about curfews and driving bans, and okay, now there's a uniformed soldier telling me I can't drive on the road. We're here now, and as scary as it is, we kind of have to acknowledge the fact that this has become a norm in the country, and that's why I wanted to mention it. Moving on to some more unfortunate news of a green suitor nature, I wanted to talk about an incident that occurred in New Jersey way back in November of last year, but I'm just finding out about it now. The short and sweet version of this incident was a parent in North Hanover posted a photograph and made a post on Facebook of explicit content that was displayed at the entrance of her child's school. Now, I think that we all know what kind of content this is. I'm not going to go into many more details than that, because you can easily Google this and find out the real story here. And I'm not going to show the photo because I consider that content to be explicit, and I'm trying to be, at least a little bit more family friendly with these kinds of videos. So I do want to say, though, that nothing in this original Facebook post was threatening in any way. It was just a photo of the explicit content that this parent's child saw at the entrance of the school. No hint of violence was anywhere near this social media post. Well, despite this, an Army Lieutenant Colonel took issue with this mom's Facebook post and immediately reported it directly to the local police chief, using the internal lines of communication that were pre-established. Per their own words, this military base communicates directly with the police chief for security reasons. It kind of makes a lot of sense if you think about it in a perspective of like a peacetime military. You want to make sure that, your guys with guns on the military base also are kind of tied in with local law enforcement, moment because there's a lot of incidents that occur. There's weird jurisdictional things. So there being a kind of shared understanding between a federal, service like a military base and a local law enforcement agency, it makes a lot of sense for lines of communication to be open. However, that's basically where the common sense stops because these lines of communication, in this case, were used to target parents, just as we saw the FBI do with regards to targeting parents all over this country for voicing their opinion at school board meetings. So, long story short, parent posts a photograph and a post showing the explicit content at her child's school. Some Army lieutenant colonel sees the post and gets the police chief to investigate and harass the local parent. Now, on a brief admin note, I'm not going to drop this specific lieutenant colonel's name right now because of several reasons. For one, this guy is clearly trying to target people, so that's not good. But also, I want to make absolutely certain that this actually is the guy, because so far the documents that I have seen and reviewed have had many names. Okay, so it's not just this one guy. There are a lot of people in this chain here, right? So I just want to make sure before we drop any names, or if we drop any names, you can easily Google this guy's name. You can, once you figure out, hey, just Google the story. This has made national press back in November, or actually I think in December is when I think Fox News picked it up. Either way, I can tell you that the interesting part about this story is the next part. So I started looking into this lieutenant colonel, right? And I just Googled his name. And one of the absolute first results that popped up was this stock photo from a stock photo website detailing his recent change of command. And wouldn't you know it, look at what unit he was the commander of. A Military Information Support Battalion. Would you look at that? You might know this kind of unit colloquially as PSYOPs. So what this story looks like is a PSYOPs commander directed a local police chief to target a parent because her child saw something obscene at school. Man, I tell you, I don't think I can comment on what that means and how serious this is. So I'm just going to move on and let this kind of stew for a bit, and if you guys want some homework, go read into this story a little bit, but I can tell you that this doesn't seem to be an isolated incident, okay? This has happened before, and this is not the last time this is going to happen, I can guarantee that. So, moving to the southeast region, we get to more traditional stuff, and that is well, let's start with the Gulf Coast for a minute. There have been an awful lot of refinery and pipeline and terminal issues down in the Gulf Coast for a variety of reasons. It's really kind of hard to explain. We could probably talk about this for quite a bit more, but let me just give you the kind of short and sweet version is that the winter weather that we had last month, the kind of, whatever buzzword, Arctic blast went through the country, broke a lot of stuff. But not just that, because we can kind of compensate for maintenance issues a lot of times, but things that we can't really fix that quickly are staffing issues and someone who doesn't know how to do their job and just other maintenance deficits or other kinds of problems. It doesn't appear like all these refineries, at least in the Gulf Coast in this specific incident I'm talking about, all these issues that we saw with the winter weather or that kind of popped up around the same time last month, these don't appear to be particularly nefarious because it just looks like there's a lot of things going on here and it's just kind of snowballing into just bad stuff, right? Parts not being there, staff not being there, cold weather breaking things, people not knowing how to fix things, people not knowing how to prevent things from happening. We're getting to the point now to where our infrastructure is crumbling, and I think it's quite obvious. And when you look at places like POL refineries and pipelines, places that have some of the most skilled work in the entire country, what happens when you have a non-skilled person or someone who's not experienced working at some of these places? You get a lot of issues. Now, that doesn't, I want to separate these issues out from all the other ones we've seen. I don't think that anyone in the country can look at refineries catching fire all over the country in the past year and say that that's normal. It's not. It's clearly not. We know this instinctively. It's just a gut feeling. We don't even need to look at any data to see how often refineries catch fire. However, when it comes to severe weather or any kind of slightly out of the norm weather, we have a lot of problems that pop up and are the result of many things. It's really hard to pinpoint and point the finger at one thing. All we know is that it just sucks, and that's just the way that it is. Now, I'm going to keep an eye on the refineries as usual and see which ones, kind kind of miraculously have an accident next, because that's a norm apparently. Every time we brief something, something else has had some kind of incident at it. But so again, we'll keep an eye on this stuff, and I just want to let everyone know that, we're not out of the woods yet with our infrastructure. We still have a long way to go, and we're just beginning to see, I think, the snowball at the top of the hill, right? And we're about to see it accelerate rapidly, just based on the amount of things we've seen happen, right? Even just taking nefarious things out of it, even just the amount of accidents we've seen happen, genuine accidents, and the amount of genuine maintenance problems, that alone can be very crippling to any infrastructural system. Moving on to the topic that has united many Americans more than I have seen in recent years, the potential gas stove ban. So, the Biden regime is planning to, or floating the idea of, potentially outright banning natural gas stoves. The reasoning behind this ban is very much unknown at the moment. We're hearing about this from the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and they have not provided really any of the research, but we're getting anecdotal evidence. As a brief side note, many of you have noticed that apparently news headlines are law, because that's the way that a lot of companies and entities and agencies have been treating things over the past year or so. We all remember how, for instance, the IRS came out with that whole $600 limit thing you've got to report, as income kind of thing. Well, guess what? All of the platforms out there, PayPal, Venmo, Cash App, all of these services went ahead and implemented that policy, even though no one had ever actually seen the policy. So it's like, what's going on here? So I think that's what's happening with this gas stove ban thing. It's not an official policy. Nothing has been signed. Nothing has even been written just yet. It's just kind of an idea that has floated to the news media. And since the news media now apparently make law, or something to that effect, what I think is going to happen is a lot of states and localities are going to ban gas stoves at the local level without the feds having to get involved in it. It's brilliant, honestly. If you think about it from a nefarious, devil's advocacy kind of situation, if you were the Biden regime, what would you do? Because remember, we've been briefing this for a couple of years now. The Biden regime has actually had a pretty hard time, in some cases, with virtue signaling. A lot of times, the news media doesn't know how to spin a story, and the Biden regime is not able to answer, hey, how should I spin this story? I'm CNN writing an editorial on something, or I'm The Atlantic writing an editorial on something, and they don't know how to spin the story because they don't know what the federal government wants. They don't know what the Biden regime wants them to say. So they just kind of wing it. And really, that's a problem because sometimes they get it wrong. Well, this is quite clear. The Biden regime has signaled to all of the virtue signaling entities, your media, your local governments, your local city council, your local county commissioners. All of these agencies and entities now are fully aware of what the feds want, and they want a ban on gas stoves, right? So the feds don't have to lift a finger. They don't have to write anything because, again, Biden can just sit at his desk and wave his magic wand, and apparently a news headline will become law. So that's kind of the situation as I see it, and the really the big concern moving forward. We don't have any information other than that. Nothing has been signed. Nothing's been published. We don't even have the research that led the Consumer Product Safety Commission to say that gas stoves are harmful for people. We just have general anecdotal evidence. I challenge you to find what the Consumer Product Safety Commission is actually talking about, because so far all I've seen is circular reporting. One news agency says, oh, well, the CPSC says they're harmful. Well, and they cite another news agency, who then cites another news agency, who then cites some guy on Twitter, who then cites some random employee at CPSC, and they can't actually find me a directive for something. So again, by the time this goes out, I'm sure there will be something in writing, because the Biden regime doesn't like to wait on things like totalitarianism. But it's interesting. This is another illustration of how laws can get, in effect, made. Like, it's a de facto law. It's a de facto regulation. People are following laws that don't exist yet. And it's happening all over the country. So I would very much recommend people to kind of look into this a little bit more. Now, to walk a lot of this back and to bring this back to a more clear perspective, I guess, we have to be aware that this might quite literally be the most palpable case of gaslighting we've ever seen. Okay, and trust me, the irony is not lost on me on this. Now, what I mean by that is the Biden regime can float this idea. Okay, they can float this idea. They can leak it to the press. The press freaks freaks out. Every American freaks out because guess what? I've seen some data, again, studies and statistics are made up nowadays, so who knows if this number's accurate, but apparently as many as 30% of the entire country, 30%, potentially a third of the citizens of this country use gas stoves. So you're now telling them that they're going to have to go buy a new stove or something. We don't know what the government's telling us, right? Because there's no information. But either way, what I mean is if this is going to happen, this is going to be very, very, very severe, and the impacts of this will be very widely felt. Now, where the gaslighting comes in is the Biden regime can say, oh, no, you misunderstood. We never meant to ban gas stoves. We meant to ban, like, this kind of gas stove or, like, this kind of connector that nobody uses or some specific technical jargon that nobody understands or that isn't actually used, right? So they can walk it back and they can say, well, no, you were spreading misinformation. We weren't going to ban gas stoves, despite the fact that's exactly what we said. We were never going to ban gas stoves. And you're just spreading misinformation, and shame on you, and, there you go. So they can walk it back very easily and gaslight the heck out of us if they want, which I think is probably what's going to happen, because, man, I tell you, if anybody bans gas stoves, oh boy, man, I don't know the impacts of that. I can tell you it's not going to be good. Oh boy. And then the next question is, all right, well, what about gas heat? Because let me tell you something, a lot more people rely on gas heat than you think, and that's not going to be good. I did see one theory, and I agree that it's kind of an interesting idea, is that, I forgot where I saw it, so sorry if you had this idea first. I've literally just forgot where I saw it. Somebody had the idea that this might be the result, or it might be intended to drive a wedge between urban and rural populations, yet another divide, right? And that's not a bad idea because natural gas is not available in the middle of nowhere. Like, I live in the middle of nowhere now, and there's no gas line anywhere near me. I don't think there's any natural gas in my entire county, to be honest. That's an interesting thing. Natural gas is really kind of a big thing in cities, but not so much in the rural areas. So rural people are not going to be affected by this really at all, but people in cities will be. It's an interesting theory. I just wanted to mention it because, like I said, I saw it somewhere. Or maybe it's just a fever dream I had. I don't know. But I thought I wanted to mention it. So very, very severe stuff. Very significant stuff if it actually comes to fruition. The other thing I wanted to mention, and I'll mention it here because the decision took place in Washington, D.C., so I figured I might as well throw it in here, and that is the Pentagon's floating the idea or submitting the proposal, I suppose is the best way of describing it, for a zero-trust infrastructure for, well, the internet at large, I guess. Now, the idea of a zero-trust infrastructure in the field of cybersecurity, a fairly simple construct, but it gets really complicated in actuality. Now, I, again, have stated many times, I am not a cybersecurity expert, so I am most certainly not going to go into the details of how this all works. But I can say that I know enough to know that this kind of thing is very concerning. Now, to explain zero-trust concepts for the layperson, which includes me, it really is kind of a complex idea. Think of it like this. In the past, or even today, actually, you have passwords for things, right? You have a username, you have an email account, and you log into a website with a password. Even physical security. You have a physical badge that gets you access into facilities or a PIN number you can put in to open or unlock a door, okay? Once an entity or a company or an agency has given you access to something, you have access to it, right? You may not have total access. That's not how it usually works. Like, after all, I can't log in to, say Gmail, for instance, and get access to Google servers. No. I just have access to the client side kind of stuff, right? If I were to use Gmail. And likewise, if you have a badge or some kind of key code to get into a building, chances are you're not going to have, a master code, right? The whole concept of access to things, whether it's cybersecurity or physical security, relies on a person being the vector by which trust can be given. It's not so much talking about trusting an individual person or not trusting a traditional person. It's about removing this construct altogether. Because here's the thing. We gave Edward Snowden trust, right? He was trusted by the NSA. He got a really high security clearance, and he got a lot of passwords and logins and a lot of stuff. Same thing with Bradley Manning, right? So maybe using the concept of, access or no access is not really the construct to move forward. Maybe we need something else. Maybe we need something that is, various applications, various, tools that are on the software side of things that can make sure that everything is running smoothly. Because as we all know, we're in an age of cyber attacks, right? Someone gets access to a system, they can shut it down, whether it's a tractor sitting in a field that's connected to some server, or cell tower or something, or if it's, a Colonial Pipeline, right? Either way, if you remove the understanding of providing access to someone based on a trust or no trust, criteria, if you go to a whole new system itself, that's kind of the way forward with regards to cybersecurity. That's a little bit hard to understand, and I fully admit I don't completely understand it myself either, because there's a lot of ways to kind of get to where you want to go with zero trust infrastructure. The bottom line for why you, the average citizen, should care about this is that this is a fantastic way to lock you out of the internet if they don't like you on it. And here's what I mean by that. One of the closest ways that you get to kind of a zero trust infrastructure is what we already kind of know throughout the cryptocurrency world, and that is the dreaded KYC, or Know Your Customer. In other words, the bane of anyone who has ever tried to buy cryptocurrency. Newsflash, it's not exactly 2010, right? You can't just go online and buy cryptocurrency with a credit card or something anonymously. It doesn't work like that. Even if you were using a credit card, that wouldn't be anonymous. But the point is that if you want to buy cryptocurrency today in 2023, you're going to have to put your social security number in somewhere. Now, there are some things and ways around this, but to be honest, in terms of most cryptocurrency, there really isn't, especially the most common cryptocurrencies. So this is kind of one of those, the closest way I can think of explaining a zero trust infrastructure is I can guarantee you KYC requirements are going to be a huge part of a zero trust infrastructure, or at least while the system's kind of getting its way out, working its way out through the development and stuff like that. So again, bottom line, this is your indication and warning. This is the video that you can look back in a couple of years' time and point back and say, I told you so, when you are locked out of your email account or your bank or your company because of something you said or thought or something you didn't say. This kind of infrastructure, the zero trust infrastructure, for me, not being a cybersecurity guy, not being a technical expert, on the one hand, it seems kind of the way forward when it comes to cybersecurity, but on the other hand, it seems like a great way to prevent me from getting on the internet at some point, right? It's a great way to build an authorized list of users on the internet, which is going to be kind of a basic requirement for this moving forward, and go from there. Again, I'm not doing a super good job of explaining this, and I'm sure far more technical experts will pop up in the comments to kind of explain this a little bit better. But the point is here's the timeline. 2027. This is from their own slide. This is the DoD's actual product that explains what the DoD is working on. And I don't know about you, but look, living in the world today and knowing how the world works, anytime the DoD does something, I'm very suspicious, okay? I hate that I have to explain that at this point, but anytime the DoD develops something, it's going to be used against Americans at some point. So I'm really kind of concerned that the timeline for this is so short, and the DoD is going to figure out a way to do this, and this would be a great way to implement, social credit. This would be a great way to implement, some kind of social ban on any of the systems that keep our society running. So I wanted to kind of bring this out as kind of homework for you guys if you were more interested in this. I'm not particularly surprised, and honestly, you don't really need to know much more information beyond what I've already told you to make a decision. And the decision, should be, look, hey, you need to start kind of moving away from these kinds of systems, because let me tell you something. The reason that we don't have such a great communications infrastructure as is because of how big these problems are. The nature of the internet in and of itself, servers connected to other servers that are controlled by other people, the way that HTTPS traffic works, it is an infrastructure that is very helpful if you don't want people on it. And if you control the way internet traffic works at the very base level, you control a lot of things. And I'm very concerned about that, so that's why I wanted to mention it here. So I'll just kind of leave it at that and move on to the next wildly different topic, which is something that I realized recently has a name, which I didn't think it did, and that is transnational repression. Transnational repression is fascinating and terrifying, and here's what it is. Transnational repression is something that we know happens, we know this happens, but we think that it's on a small scale. So small, in fact, that I didn't even think that it had a name. I thought it was just, oh, wow, okay, that was kind of a rare thing. This is when a foreign government chooses to intimidate, assault, imprison, arrest, or whatever its citizens while they are in another country. Now, that should ring a bell because CNN ran this article from a while back, I think it was last month, in which CNN, of all places, admitted that China is operating over 100 police stations across the world with the help of some host nations, report claims. That's the actual headline of this news article from CNN. I'm shocked, right? Again, this is something that's not new at all. We have known that this occurs all over the world, particularly with China. China is a nation that is obsessed with its citizens, and more accurately, I suppose, obsessed with controlling its citizens, because that's how it maintains power. China is a communist nation. They quite literally are. Xi Jinping, or Xi Jinping, however you pronounce his name, he is not the president of China. China does not have a president. He is the general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party. It's right there on his Wikipedia page. So when communist nations do things like this, when they are very concerned with citizens of theirs outside of their nations, we have things like the East-West Berlin dynamic back during the Cold War. We have very interesting things occur. Well, the same thing's happening today. And we now know, it's become public record, that there are secret Chinese police stations all over the United States that secretly detain and sometimes torture their citizens for saying or doing something, and thinking that being in the US they're outside the reach of China. Well, they most certainly are not. The scary part about all of this, you might think, okay, well, this is still pretty rare, right? It's pretty fascinating and slightly terrifying that China, is concerned about their own citizens this much, but, any historian is going to tell you this is not surprising at all. So if we recognize this is happening, and, even though your average citizen out there in the United States is going to say, well, how does this affect me? After all, I'm not a Chinese national living in the United States. For those people, man, it sucks, and, I would be very concerned about, being either, assassinated or captured or imprisoned, in some safe house that the Chinese government has set up in New York. I'd be very concerned about that if I was a Chinese citizen, not so much if I'm an American. Here's where it gets a little concerning for the American citizens listening. And that is that the feds are now onto this, and it has become so much of a problem that the FBI has set up a website and a hotline and all kinds of threat intimidation guides to help citizens escape their own nation. Now again, this is the FBI, and it is very clear that the FBI has their own goals, and those goals I do not think align with anything good. But it is very interesting that now the FBI is quietly trying to spread the word about this and trying to address this issue of foreign police officers exerting their influence and taking jurisdiction on U.S. soil. I have to be very careful when describing this because I don't want the runaway trains of the past. We all remember that 4-month period of time where I was getting about 200 emails a day regarding people claiming that China had invaded Canada, or that there were, remember all those cargo ships off the coast of California? Yeah, those shipping containers were all full of Chinese agents and Chinese spies, and Chinese military were planning to invade via San Francisco. Yeah, I lived that nightmare of trying to walk that back and kind of show people that yes, okay, concerns valid, It's not true. Moving on. When it comes to this is very much true. And it is so much true that the FBI is now issuing memos to lower law enforcement, local law enforcement agencies, trying to explain to them that this is a huge threat now, and to what should a local police officer do if they encounter a Chinese police officer trying to arrest a Chinese citizen on U.S. soil. That is a huge concern, because the FBI doesn't do anything unless it has already become too much of a problem, too big of a problem. So I just wanted to kind of point that out, that this is a much bigger problem than just a CNN article. There are actual agencies tracking this and trying to figure out what to do about it, because again, this is a foreign nation conducting policing actions on U.S. soil, and that's a huge problem. Again, for the average citizen out there, what can you do about it? I don't know. I mean, I'm just going to be completely honest with you and say, look, I don't think that you can contact the FBI, they've got a hotline, they've got a number, but I don't think it's going to help, because at that stage, good grief, it's kind of a serious problem. So again, I wanted to bring this up and make everyone aware that this is an issue, so that when it becomes more of an issue in the future, we can have a basis for understanding of how all this works. Now, again, let me walk it back a little bit and say, look, I don't think you're going to walk into a Chinese police officer in your everyday life. This is going to be a very select problem for a select few. But hey, if you're at a university, and you've got the majority of, say, a nuclear engineering class is, Chinese nationals. I mean, when I was in college, I had to take a few courses, and the courses which were about things like energy policy and nuclear engineering turned out to all be Iranian students. In one class, I was one of 3 U.S. passport holding American citizens, and the rest of them were either Iranian or Chinese nationals. So that's another problem for another day, I suppose. But for these people, if they're not spies themselves, which I think, a good portion of them are, it's a concerning thing, especially for Chinese nationals trying to flee China or flee Hong Kong or things like that, or big names that have already left the country. China is, again, a nation that is obsessed with not being humiliated, and if you tend to humiliate China and you are a Chinese national, well, that doesn't tend to end well for you. So, again, just wanted to bring it up and make everyone aware of this, because this is going to be a huge problem for the foreseeable future, I think. Moving on to the East Central Midwestern region, let's bring it back to our old standby of chemical manufacturing plants catching on fire. And in this case, our winner for this time around is LaSalle County, Illinois, specifically Karas Chemical. Hopefully I pronounced all that right. They had a very large fire / an explosion at their chemical plant. And this one is very suspicious because it started, first of all, with an explosion that began from inside a shipping container. And, kind of suspicious. There, of course, was nobody around I don't know if the facility was occupied at the time of the explosion or not, but there was no one around the shipping container when it exploded. And also, there is apparently hazmat concerns, because immediately following the explosion and multiple alarm fire, a green oxidizing substance was observed to be leaking from the facility, which had to be neutralized via various chemicals by firefighters. So again, not a super great thing. Again, when we talk about factories or chemical plants or stuff like that, blowing up or catching fire, we have to look at everything. We have to look at all sources, right? And one of the major things that I personally look for is, all right, was a facility abandoned at the time? Because if it was abandoned at the time, that's going to be a huge indicator that it might not be as nefarious as you think. Because what is the point of a Black Ops wet work team, attacking a facility that has no one working at it? What is the point of some kind of social movement or domestic group, I should say, attacking a facility that's not in use, right? However, we do see places that are abandoned burned down all the time due to drug use, due to vagrancy, due to a variety of factors, right? Even accidents or lightning strikes are the result of a lot of this. With this plant, they had just broken ground on a $20 million expansion of the plant in August of 2022. So they were doing pretty good, it seems. They were expanding the plant. They were looking at growing. I've got a dozen photos online about, showing their grand expansion, right? And now suddenly their plant gets crippled by some kind of incident that we're not really sure about that started inside a shipping container. Very interesting. I don't know if this plant has a history of safety violations. My quick, Google foo did not really reveal anything. Usually if you Google one of these company names like the one last time, I forget the name, they had like a laundry list of fires and maintenance problems and staffing problems, and it was just like an accident a day for years until, the thing finally just had enough and blew up. This one, I didn't really find anything. Now, I'm sure somebody out there knows the history of this plant, especially locals might know what's going on there, but just let everybody know, I wasn't able to find any kind of significant history of negligency at this plant, at least from my brief search. So again, we'll chalk that one up to some kind of, incident, and we'll just keep it in our memory and move on and wait for the next one. Moving on to the West Central Midwestern region, you guys get a reprieve from the bit of bad news this time around. I wasn't able to find anything that occurred that was worth mentioning this time around. I'm sure next time I'll find something, but let's go ahead and move on down to the southern border region. And for the rest of the states that are in this, kind of area, I didn't really have much. I really just kind of wanted to focus on the Texas border again. And like I mentioned last time, sorry, I haven't really had time to drill down and provide a lot of the information that I wanted to for this. So let me just say this, and that is the border crisis is continuing and growing worse. However, the response to it is getting a little bit better in some areas, but it certainly looks like the events over the past month or so, especially with Biden's high-profile visit down there, this is a losing battle, particularly with the cross-border violence that is likely to occur from the incidents going on in Mexico. Now, I know a lot of you wanted me to have a dedicated slide on this. I got it. I'm working on it. I'm still building the maps for this and trying to figure out what's going on, because I am not a South America analyst. I'm not a Central America analyst. I've never been there, and I'm having to do a lot of learning because spoiler alert, the cartel situation in South and Central America and in Mexico is kind of complicated, and it goes back kind of a long way. So really what you need to know for now is that El Chapo's son, one of the biggest cartel leaders in the area, really, the Sinaloa cartel, right? Everybody's seen Sicario, right? So no further explanation needed, right? Well, no, really, El Chapo's son was arrested, and the Sinaloa boys have gotten a little spicy, and they've basically declared a general mobilization against the Mexican government until they release him. Well, the Mexican government is not going to release him. He's going to be extradited to the United States, or at least that's what they claim so far. Either way, I will delve into the situation in Mexico a little bit more at some point when I get time to actually learn about the situation, and then I can speak more intelligently on it. All we know is that you can hop on social media right now and see an awful lot of warfare going on in pretty much all over Mexico right now because of this. Now, where it comes to the United States coming into the situation, this just makes a bad situation worse, right? It makes an already tense border situation where there are thousands of active duty soldiers, thousands and hundreds of law enforcement from every badge you can imagine, every agency you can imagine is down there at the border. And you can argue whether or not it's enough people or not. Everybody knows that in no operation are you going to have enough people to do what you want to do. But there are an awful lot of people down there. It's a very tense situation. There is a very high chance for international incidents, right? We have already seen cartel members attacking U.S. soldiers who are standing guard on the border at some of these more high-profile locations. And it's not good. There have been dozens of incidents since the start of this whole border crisis, which granted is decades in the making. But the bottom line is that right now it's pucker factor 9.5 down there, and it's not likely to get any better anytime soon. So please be advised that this is a situation that's going to develop further. Now, again, to keep things in perspective, I don't think we have to worry so much about, the cartels invading the United States. That's not what I'm saying is going to happen. We certainly have to worry about the humanitarian crisis. We have to worry about the immigration crisis. Or we have to worry about a lot of things. But I'm not so much looking for cartel members trying to invade the United States. That's not what's going on here. What I mean is you're probably going to have a lot of U.S. soldiers targeted, either for political reasons or just because they're guys with guns in close proximity to other guys with guns who are probably very upset about the situation in their country right now. So even though there is really no motivation whatsoever for the violence that's going on in Mexico to spill over into the United States, there might be a little bit of a reason for justification. Now, a huge flashpoint to look out for is when you start seeing news headlines saying that the extradition of Ovidio Guzman, the El Chapo's son, right? When his extradition has happened. Okay, because right now a judge in Mexico has halted his extradition while they figure out what's going on here. So again, when that extradition takes place, because it will most likely take place, the U.S. has been trying to hunt this guy for a long time, ever since we got El Chapo himself. This guy's a very senior member of the Sinaloa cartel, so we're not going to let this guy get away if we have to go down there and get him ourselves, which is most likely what's going to happen either way. The bottom line is that for guys down there on the border, if you see this dude's extradition has taken place, because you're most likely not going to know about when it takes place ahead of time. It's going to be handled by very special people in very special ways, right? They're going to sneak this guy back across the border into the U.S. somehow. Well, when that happens, it's going to make the news. And you need to be very careful about the situation down there on the border, because then all those dudes with guns who are very upset about their senior boss getting arrested, they're now going to have a justification to start pointing those barrels towards the border. So I just wanted to bring that up and mention that this is kind of a big deal, and even though I'm not an expert on it right now, I can clearly see the writing on the wall, and that's probably not very good. So again, something to keep an eye on for the future. And moving out west, getting back to the tradition of things, we have many attacks that have occurred on electrical substations. So again, I'm not going to mention all of the ones that have occurred in the Pacific Northwest. In Oregon and Washington, there have been around half a dozen or so within the past couple of months, and they have ranged from possible theft to vandalism to tampering to actually like shooting at transformers and things like that. It's really kind of hard to say because a lot of these things are they're not making the press in the way that you'd want them to make the press, because the mainstream media is running the headline, but there's no information there because, federal authorities are not going to release the details of these attacks to the mainstream public, which on the one hand makes a lot of sense because the feds are obviously not going to want to encourage or provide targeting guidance for people trying to target other places around the country, so keeping those details secret makes a lot of sense. However, by keeping things secret, the general public and ourselves included are not able to discern why these places were attacked or if there was something that we could do to prevent it. Because, for instance, we're sending hundreds of millions of dollars to another country that shall not be named, but if we can't afford a $50 padlock for a facility, then that's a problem. If we're not going to, it's cheaper to file an insurance claim to get a $500,000 transformer out to a specific site than it is to, buy that, security guard to stand there and watch it all day. Either way, the result for people like you and me is the same. We don't have electricity for a few days. And this is a concern, especially for incidents like the one that occurred at the PG&E facility, really just a small substation. Well, it really wasn't a substation. It's actually a solar farm that provided power to a lot of the casinos in Las Vegas. Now, this incident was very interesting, and this was I'm going to call it, I have it on the slide here as probable, I'm going to call it an almost certain Islamic terrorist attack. Really, the attack vector was this. It was a guy drove his vehicle into the mega array, the solar array that provides power, again, for MGM Resorts in Las Vegas. He rammed his vehicle through the gate, and then some press reports are reporting that he siphoned gasoline out of the tank and set that ablaze, including the transformer or some kind of electrical apparatus that he drove his vehicle into. Now, you might note the date on this. This occurred on January 7th/8th, right? We became aware of it on the 8th, and it probably occurred overnight on January 7th. Now, this coincides, interestingly enough, with Al-Qaeda's usual yearly press statement. So, for the past few years, Al-Qaeda has, still been around. They're still a thing, and they have issued directives / like a Happy New Year, Death to America message, right? And the one for this year specifically recommended their people to carry out attacks on U.S. soil. I think this is just me spitballing with very little evidence to back it up, so just be aware of that. But I think that's what the reason for this attack was. I think that your lone wolf attacks, probably funded by some domestic U.S. agency, carry out these kinds of attacks. That's why I think we saw another attack in New York City, Times Square, on New Year's Eve. A police officer was attacked with a machete, and I think that's also why we're seeing some of these attacks, right? That message came out, and your lone wolf extremists here in the United States were motivated to do stuff like that. Again, it just kind of shows you that the counterterrorism has never really been an easy job, but at the same time, I would be willing to bet that these kinds of things would have been easily preventable had the right people been working in the counterterrorism industry, and had the counterterrorism agencies in the United States actually been concerned with tracking foreign terrorists rather than trying to target parents at school board meetings. But again, there's no real way for me to describe these kinds of things in neutral language anymore. I just have to call it like I see it, and I would be willing to bet my thought is that around New Year's time we saw Al-Qaeda release their message, and boom, now we have a handful of attacks happening in the United States. Low-level attacks that really didn't have too much of an effect, but still, it's like, man, hey, a rookie analyst could have called this. I mean, these federal agencies are spying on us no matter what, and they're investigating people for speaking out at school board meetings, but yet they can't actually dedicate time to conducting counterterrorism operations that are relatively easy to do. These guys would have been very easy to find because it's always like, they were known to the FBI beforehand. But anyway, that's a whole lot of speculation that I'm sure you guys don't really want to hear, so I'll just end my kind of ranting and raving on that for now, and let's move to something a little bit more interesting, and that is, we're going to skip over the entirety of Europe for now, sorry guys, and we're going to move to kind of I don't want to call it a bigger threat, but an interesting threat, and that is the Far East. Yes, the invasion of Taiwan by China. The ultimate will they, won't they? This is something that has been debated by military strategists that get paid a lot more than me for a very long time, and no one seems to have a really good answer for any of this. Will China invade Taiwan? Nobody knows. We know generally what it would look like, very, very generally, and we know that China has been making very strong aspirations toward the small island nation over the past, few years, but really the past few months. For instance, last month they launched one of their largest military exercises, the largest one they've ever done, which was like 70-something aircraft, including bombers, fighters, you name it. It looked like the party was about to start, but they would have to have thousands of aircraft in the air for that. But again, I am not a Far East analyst. I've never spent any time at PACOM, and nobody else here has either. So I'm having to kind of get spun up on that as well. The reason you might care about an invasion of Taiwan by China is, for a few reasons, but really the main theory is the island chain theory, which states that if China is going to invade Taiwan, they're going to have to keep going. And they know that if they take Taiwan, it's going to take the vast majority of their military, and they're going to have to kind of expand into Southeast Asia and especially the South China Sea if they have any hope of winning that conflict. Really, you can kind of very generally see where China is going to have to do exactly what Japan did during World War II. They're going to have to take these small island chains, island hop as far as they can before the world mobilizes against them. Will this cause World War III? I don't know. Back in the day, man, when I was kind of like a junior analyst, I always thought it was kind of my own, thinking that, look, we're going to find out that China invaded Taiwan when the missiles land in Kentucky. That was kind of my thought is, look, China's going to have to attack the United States at the same time that they attack Taiwan. That was my theory then, and I don't know how much validity that holds today, but I can tell you that if the United States Navy is in the area when and or if China decides to go this way and actually invade Taiwan, you boys out there better be careful, because I can tell you that it may not be a certainty, but I think that it is likely that if China were to invade Taiwan, the majority of PACOM will be sunk probably within an hour. by China, and they're going to have to do that to actually have any kind of hope at invading Taiwan. But again, that's just my own worst case scenario thinking. Either way, moving forward, I am developing my own sort of stoplight criteria for will China invade Taiwan, and this is something that me, as again a not expert on the area, this is something that I am doing, and I've created and I am creating right now. Again, this is an incomplete product that I'm showing you, but I'm creating stoplight criteria for if China were to invade. Now, fortunately, the good news is that all of these criteria are very well known, and they're very observable even by civilians like myself, right? And these are some of the things that China is going to have to do immediately before an invasion, okay? We're going to see kind of what has happened in a lot of other countries that have been invaded, or, in recent memory, like in the past 50 years. All of this kind of stuff happened as well, but especially with China, this is what they're going to have to do. The first and biggest one that everybody cites, from CSIS to everybody else, everybody says stockpiling of medical supplies. Let's face it, the U.S. military and a lot of Western think tanks have done a lot of drills. They've done a lot of theories, have run a lot of analytical experiments, and they have figured out what China certainly knows themselves as well, is that they're going to lose a lot of people. They're going to lose in the tens of millions, probably on the first day of an invasion of Taiwan, and that is depending on how kinetic it gets. Numbers are always hard to give, but I can tell you that this is not going to get... China's invasion of Taiwan is most certainly not going to go like Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Not going to happen. It's going to be so much worse for China than it has been for Russia. China is going to lose hundreds of thousands of people in the first wave. Like, that's just a fact. It's just going to happen. China's got to be planning for that, and they're going to need to stockpile billions of pounds of medical supplies. Stockpiling which we can see. Another thing that's going to happen is what we in the analytical world like to politely refer to as capital flight or elite flight. Basically, that's all your rich people leaving the country as fast as they humanly can. Just like what happened with Ukraine. All of the people that have private jets, just like with Afghanistan too, everybody who's got an aircraft is going to mass exodus from the country right before the invasion. That's going to happen. It can't not happen. China's got there are a lot of air bases in other countries that are within range of China. I mean, good grief, even a small private jet from a billionaire can land pretty much anywhere in Southeast Asia, and most of West Asia as well. So you're going to see capital flight. So if you see a lot of billionaires' planes leave the ground in China all within like an hour of each other, you need to be aware of that. So there's that. Also, we're going to see money stuff, liquidation of foreign financial assets, freeze on internal finances within China so they can support their war effort. Other things in the economy like wartime economies being enforced, civil lockdowns, things like that. Things that you would expect to see by any nation going to war. And we're also going to see basically a rapid deployment of naval assets. Everything that floats is in China is going to have to be in the water. And also, there's going to have to be a recall of people to coastal defense bases. Now, the coastal defense bases, I'm still building the map on that, but it's very interesting is that the vast majority of all of China's military bases are on the coastline right across the Taiwan Strait from Taiwan. There's a huge number of bases there. Most of China's military bases, almost all of their airfields, are within range of Taiwan. That shows you that China's military has been investing very heavily in the Taiwan fight. Their entire military is built for that purpose. That, like, we forget, like Russia's military. Russia's entire military is built to conduct actions like invading Ukraine, or smaller policing actions, I guess, or regional powers. But either way, China's military is definitely meant to take Taiwan. So you can't dismiss that offhand without kind of factoring that in to the invasion potential. And the other big event, the other star that's going to have to be in alignment for an imminent invasion is the weather. Remember, this is going to have to be amphibious. This is going to have to be mostly amphibious because Taiwan is mostly rocky. Now, there will be airborne elements, I'm sure, but for the most part, we're looking at Chinese soldiers storming the beaches in Taiwan, the few beaches that there are. And to do that, they're going to have pretty good weather. So they're not going to have good weather for the initial bombardment, the turning of Taiwan into a parking lot via artillery, well, not really artillery so much as, missiles, cruise missiles, all kinds of stuff, bombing raids. They're going to turn Taiwan into a parking lot, the very first thing. And they don't need good weather to do that. But they do need good weather to land the troops that are necessary following such an attack. Now, fortunately, as you can see, most of these are red. The weather's pretty good. Typhoon season is not until a little bit later. So right now is kind of perfect weather, so to speak, except for, local weather. Climatology-wise, it's good. Local weather patterns, I'm not sure what the sea state in the Taiwan Strait is today. I don't know. But these are really the kind of imminent criteria for an immediate invasion. Now, the other thing I'm looking for, besides this gigantic stoplight chart here, the other stoplight chart I'm building is what are foreign powers going to do about it? Now, this is where you, the average citizen, can actually be pretty much at the tip of the spear with this. Look, we may not know when China is planning to invade Taiwan, but we can be pretty well certain that the U.S. intelligence agencies and Russian intelligence agencies that are tracking this will absolutely know when China is getting ready to invade Taiwan. Certainly within a couple of days. I would be willing to bet they could probably predict it months or even weeks out, just like with Ukraine. We were able to predict Ukraine's invasion. Everybody is. Even the low-level analyst was able to predict that from months out. So even though, again, they're different countries, we can be relatively certain that the United States will know and Russia will know. Now, whether or not they take that public, who knows? Probably not. But the good news is they're still going to talk about it. And I don't hesitate for 1 minute to think that both the United States and Russia will be taking strategic precautions on the day of or the day prior to the invasion of Taiwan. And here's what I mean by that. You're going to see a huge increase in strategic radio traffic from the Russians and from the Americans. You're going to see the HF GCS frequencies light up for the United States, meaning the Air Force's Emergency Action Message EAM notification service is going to light up. You're going to start seeing a lot of traffic. You're not going to be able to decipher what that traffic is, but you're going to see it. Same thing with the Russians. You're going to see the BareNet pop up again. And it's going to be, with the Russians at least, since they are much closer than we are, you're probably going to be able to determine that it's Taiwan based on the radio stations that are going to be emitting or transmitting radio traffic. So we can get more into this detail a little bit later, but I just wanted to let everyone know, watch the BareNet. Watch the BareNet if you've got a HF radio or just a receiver or an SDR. It's kind of funny that a $30 SDR dongle and, an antenna that is rated for the frequencies that you're trying to listen to, it's kind of funny that cheap setup is actually going to help you, the average citizen, be more aware of when things are happening strategically in the world. But this is one of the things that we monitor, right? So strategic radio traffic is going to spike. Anytime in the world that I see the HFGCS from the Air Force go active, and anytime I see the BareNet go active at the same time, I think, something's going on. What is it? And you start figuring out what's going on. A lot of times it's just a drill. So for instance, if there was actually just a Stratcom drill the other day, and the HFGCS was pretty active from what I could hear, and the Russian BareNet was not. So you tend to think, all right, cool, if these strategic radio frequencies are being used by only one party, the other party's not concerned about it, which means they knew that it was probably a drill as well. So again, that's just kind of another tangent that I can go down a little bit further, but I wanted to let everybody know that's what I'm looking at. Is we don't necessarily need to look at what China is doing, we need to look at what the United States and what Russia are doing. So those can be huge indicators for what's going on in the Far East. Same thing with the deployment of ballistic missile submarines. Again, this is a little harder to do. It's easier to track with the Russians, but it's harder to do with the United States, because the United States, for whatever reason, it's a little bit harder to detect when a U.S. SSBN has left port, because we tend to keep that very, very, very secret. Whereas the Russians, you can easily see their boomers sitting pier side for the most part, and when they leave, you can track this stuff with Landsat imagery. So again, this is another huge indicator of something going on. If you're looking at Landsat imagery, if you just pull it for the day, or you use like an online service to look at Landsat imagery from like that morning or the day of, and you start looking at Russian submarine bases and see, ooh, there aren't any submarines left. They all left, and they were all there yesterday. That's a huge clue that something's going on, and yeah, you can pretty easily track that, from a prepared citizenry perspective. You don't need to be a professional analyst to do that. You can see a Russian submarine with Landsat, no problem. You can't identify it usually, but you can tell if it's a boomer or not, and yeah, that's something to certainly be on the lookout for. And the last indicator for now, for the foreign powers kind of things, is Liberty. Look for Liberty recalls. Sailors, for whatever reason, still don't understand OPSEC on either side, mostly the Russian side. The U.S. sailors are getting a little bit better at it, but you still got guys being recalled from their Liberty or from their leave. So if you see everybody in PACOM suddenly getting recalled to the ship because they've got to go out like right now, something's going on. And it's not going to be just one. It's not going to be like, oh, you've got a buddy on, whatever platform it is out there, and they got recalled. It could be anything. But if everybody gets recalled at once, that's a huge concern. Again, something that you're not really going to be able to track unless you know somebody on one of those platforms. But sometimes you might get lucky. You might find somebody making a social media post that says, I just noticed, I just walked by the pier this morning, I'm on my, walking my dog, and I noticed that all the ships left, and there aren't any sailors in the town anymore. So something to be mindful of, because the U.S. Navy most certainly will be deploying in force, if nothing more than to monitor and presence patrol the South China Sea in the event that China invades Taiwan. Same thing with the Russians, except they're gonna kick around up north and most likely keep an eye on the United States, Alaska, Japan. You know the drill, right? Old Cold War kind of stuff. But either way, we arrive at our final stoplight chart, and that is the soft criteria for an impending invasion. This is going to be, when I finish it, a much longer and larger list. This is going to be some of the more long-term or further out indicators. For instance, a soft hold on foreign travel for elites. China is going to want to prevent that brain drain. They're going to want to prevent that capital flight, right? They don't want that to occur. They don't want people to get on private jets with a suitcase full of money. They want to make sure those people stay. So China is going to most likely start restricting the number of diplomats and powerful people that leave the country. A great way to do this is by medical lockdowns for medical reasons. Oh, no. You can't go to this conference in San Francisco because of medical reasons. It's not because we want to prevent you from leaving the country with your millions of dollars. That kind of thing. That's the kind of thing that we're going to be looking for. Also, the slowing of foreign oil exports. China exports a lot of oil. They also import some. So slowing of the oil exports, they're going to need an awful lot of oil to make it to their country for just for survival. And right now, that's why one of the reasons why one of the very first countries that landed in Kabul following the fall of Afghanistan was China. China sent diplomats to secure a trade deal with the Taliban to run a pipeline to their country. Now, granted, that pipeline wasn't, specifically crude oil, but you see the idea. China is definitely trying to secure their energy sources independent of every other nation. That's concerning, and it's already happening. Other things that are kind of no-brainer preparations for war are increasing production of military hardware. China's going to start churning out a lot of hardware. They're going to start hardening a lot of strategic military targets. They just installed more, nuclear silos out in the desert. They have put a lot of money into building a lot of new military bases. A lot of these bases have been over by the border with India. So all in all, bottom line last, I guess, China is not likely to invade Taiwan within the next couple of weeks, but we may find out in a couple of weeks that they're planning to invade in a few weeks, if that makes any sense. Right now, we're not seeing too many of the, oh my gosh, emergency, Taiwan's going to invade in a couple of hours criteria, but there are quite a few indicators that show that China is most certainly readying for something, and I don't think it's a bake sale. They're planning on invading Taiwan very clearly. The question is, when? I don't think anybody has the answer to that right now. Even those who are in the know and working in the field, I don't think anybody's got a solid number or solid date that China is going to launch an invasion of Taiwan just yet. But in a month or so, we may find that we have a date now. So it's really hard to say. It is generally accepted throughout the analytical community that Taiwan is pretty much safe from invasion during monsoon season. which is in the summertime, or at least the most severe ones in the summertime. So really, during your summer months when there are typhoons rolling in all the time, it's not really going to be a great time for China to be invading Taiwan, especially with an amphibious assault, which is certainly required, right? So really, this spring is kind of it. If China wants to invade Taiwan, they're going to have to start moving on it now, or they're going to have to start making these early soft criteria come into fruition a little bit more. And then in a few weeks, we might start seeing some emergency criteria pop up. Either way, we're on the lookout now, and it's too far out right now for me, not being the expert in this area, to commit to saying, all right, China's going to invade at this time and date. They're going to invade in 2023. I don't know yet. It may be 2024. Who knows? China has been well known to time their actions based on American politics. So who knows? Maybe 2024 is what they're going for. I don't know. But I can tell you that we're definitely watching and we're definitely waiting. And on that foreshadowing note, I think we'll call it a day. That's pretty much all I have at the moment. And I guess we'll have to follow things and see how things go. Lots of strategic moves being made. Lots of things going on internationally and domestically here in the U.S. And I didn't even touch on Europe today, but trust me, my brothers in Europe, I see what's going on, and it's not a super great situation, but we'll swing back around to that next time. For right now, I just wanted to get a lot of this off my plate so that I can focus on some other stuff for a bit and get this out the door, because I think this is a lot of stuff that we need to be aware of and need to be tracking for the future. So thank you again, everyone, for watching, and we will see you next time. And as always, fight in the shade.